Welcome to Open Source Question Burns. I'm Flavie, and this is Rob.
Hello. So today we're extremely proud to welcome Kyle Simpson with us, who's one of our open source and JavaScript inspirations, a real guru to us and a real mentor. So thank you for being here with us, Kyle.
No, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
And so we're going to start off with some really simple questions just to get the ball rolling. And let's start straight away. So holographic universe or flat earth on a turtle?
I'm not entirely sure I know what holographic universe means. I'm pretty sure I know that the earth is not flat on the back of a turtle. So I guess given the choice between the two, I'll say holographic universe.
Okay, so you're lying in the Matrix camp, not in the Discworld camp, but that's cool.
What should kids learn first, coding or cooking?
I think obviously cooking is a bit easier even if you can't read, and coding usually requires some degree of reading. My kids, I've got young kids that are 4 and 6, and they both enjoyed helping mom in the kitchen before I got them into JavaScript. They are starting to look at JavaScript now, but they both kind of enjoyed the kitchen first. So I guess I'd have to lean towards cooking.
macOS, Linux, or Windows?
I don't really like any of these three operating systems. I grew up hardcore Windows for like 15, 20 years, from the original Windows 3.1 all the way up. And then several years back, 6-something years back, I got tired of the hardware that Windows machines came on, and I switched to a MacBook Air. And this is the best piece of hardware. It is still the best piece of hardware as far as laptops are concerned that's ever been created. I'll fight anybody that tells me different. The MacBook Air is just the perfect mix of what a computer should be, to be portable and sit on my lap. And it's so sad that Apple just has abandoned it. So I tolerate macOS because of this great hardware, and I would in a heartbeat switch back to Windows if I thought for sure that there was hardware that was better. I have hopes that maybe the Surface laptop will be that. We'll see. So I macOS, but only by a slight margin.
And Yarn or NPM?
I'm old school. NPM is great for me. I didn't have the problems that the Yarn folks seem to have. I'm excited that they have something great, but I don't want to go learn a bunch of new commands, so I'm going to stick with NPM.
And so if we move over to the terminal, the shell command, bash or CSH?
I grew up in Bash, and I think that's mostly because I grew up in the Debian world. So all of my command line and Debian's kind of seems to be the default standard, or at least it was in my day in the Debian world. So gotta stay with Bash.
Vim or Emacs?
Vim is the only answer on this screen. Emacs, I know this creates lots of fights, but Vim is great. It does anything I need on the command line, so I don't need a whole operating system in my editor. I don't need Emacs.
A bit single page applications or server-side rendered HTML?
I'm going to say neither and both. I have been preaching a message of the straight in between those two for since 2009, 2010. Actually, since before there was a Node.js, I've been trying to convince people around me that the best web architecture is one that starts with server-rendered HTML, graduates to single-page application, but then in the same session can equally make use of both. I call it sort of adaptive design or reflexive design, where the idea is that the application monitors the environment and figures out who's best to do a piece of work. The browser's not always best, the server's not always best, but together the two can work. And that's why the rise of isomorphic JavaScript, which, by the way, that's a terrible term. That's not what it should be called. You know, the idea of sharing the same code between both environments, that's why it's so important, because you really should have agnostic JavaScript. You should have JavaScript that can render and run an application no matter what the head is. It could be a browser, it could be an Apple Watch, it could be a voice-activated Amazon Echo. What should happen is the application should not care so much about the client. And so we need to decouple those things and allow those clients to interpret what they need. So I think we need to be somewhere in the middle. But if I had to choose, I'm probably going to stick a little more towards the server-side rendered, mostly because I just still believe fundamentally in templating. And I know that's super old school because everybody's moved to the virtual DOM. I love templates, and I've never seen why templates aren't good enough. I use a technique I kind of call differential templating, which manages only updating the parts of a template or re-rendering the parts of a template, and they need to be re-rendered. Accomplishes all the same goals, and I think far simpler. So templating leads me to strings, which leads me to server-side rendered instead of virtual DOM.
More WebStorm, Visual Studio Code, Sublime, or Atom?
I use Sublime exclusively.
Okay.
It's a really good, solid environment. I've got a handful of pretty good plugins. I don't really make it a full-blown IDE, but I've got a handful of plugins like JS Hint and some syntax highlighting, and I'm a very much a creature of habit. I've got it customized to a very specific thing. I've like literally gone in and edited the code for some of the syntax highlighting and so for example, my JSON highlighting is customized because I want JSON to render a certain way. So I've got it very, very specific, and I am completely convinced that if I tried to replicate that in any other environment, I would do all the shaving that I don't want to do. So I'm stuck in my ways. Sublime is good.
Well, now, without choosing, what are your views on React, Angular, or Vue.js?
I'm glad you didn't make me choose. Everybody wants me to choose.
Of course not.
Everybody wants me to pick one. So what's interesting, I'll pick out React and Angular first and say, for a long time, I felt like React and Angular were very different views of the world. And the more time goes on, the more they evolve, and the more I have understood where they're coming from, I almost see these two as more similar than disalike. And what I mean by that is that both of them have, in my view, both of them have a perspective that the old way of thinking about how we divided responsibility or the separation of concerns, the old way was very stratified, which was you had your CSS and your HTML and your JavaScript kind of layered, and you could consider each one of those concerns independently. That I grew up that way. I fought to the death to get people to do that, to not put their click handlers in their HTML and all of that stuff, because those sorts of things resonated with me, and that's where my career was, burned in the fire, forged in the fire. And so there's a shift that's happened, where a 90-degree shift, where the concerns now, instead of being stratified across technology, they're stratified across components, the componentized view of the world. I want all of my CSS, HTML, and JavaScript to be collected together for this thing, and then I'm going to want to repeat that whole stack for this other thing, and this whole. So we repeat that stack entirely. And while I understand the concerns of that, I feel like that is far less efficient. And it's because most of what I do sits at a level above those components. I'm thinking more about libraries and about architectures, and I don't really spend as much of my time figuring out how to get the calendar to sit right next to the budget or whatever. I'm thinking about things like, how does the calendar widget efficiently communicate with the carousel widget? And when you think of those two things as entirely separate sandboxes that have no communication and overlap, the componentized view of the world makes sense. But when you think about them in the holistic sense of, I want to optimize the chain all the way from the server up to the browser, I want to optimize the chain so that styles are being handled in the appropriate way for that mechanism, and that HTML is being handled with the templating system, and that JavaScript is being handled this way. When you think about that, it's far easier to have the stratified view of technology rather than the component world. So the component revolution that's happened over the last, 3 to 4 years, it didn't catch on with me. I didn't understand the motivations behind it. I feel like some of it's been a bit myopic and misguided. I know that people love it, and for that reason, I'm glad. If people love web development more because they can develop that way, I think that's great. I think those are good. But React and Angular are basically just two different ways of accomplishing that same goal. In Angular, you put your code and in some respects your style right in your markup. And in React, you put your markup right in your code and your style right in your code. But they've both said, don't stratify across technology, repeat the entire technology stack for each component. And if that's the way your brain works and that works for you well, for me, I find it incredibly difficult if I want to think about CSS in a holistic sense, that I now have 15 different files I have to go look at. To me, that's crazy. I want to go look at my CSS in one block, and I want to have that hat on. And then when I want to think about markup, I want to have a different hat on. That's just where I came from. I'm an old grumpy man. But so for me, React and Angular, different ways of doing the same thing. They solve a lot of problems that I think most people don't have. So people rush to pick up a technology thinking they may have that problem down the road because other people that they like and admire have had that problem. And they don't always pick the right tool for the job. React might be quicker to get up and going, but it might not be the correct project for your app. The slow burn of picking up Angular might be more appropriate. And then we bring in Vue.js into the world, which is kind of the new hipster entry, I suppose. And I don't mean that in an insulting way, but a lot of really intelligent folks are getting on that bandwagon. At first, I was real excited about Vue because they kind of embrace the idea of templating. And as I said, I'm more of a templating guy than a virtual DOM guy. I still think we're going to eventually come back full circle to why templating is more appropriate and more efficient. But Vue.js kind of picked up that world, and I was like, I think that's cool. I want to look at it. The more I looked into it, there's quite a few things about the way they do stuff that I like and don't like. So, but I'm actually glad that exists and is getting the attention it is, because I think it's going to keep React and Angular on their toes, so to speak. I think that's going to force them to ask the question, wait a minute, why do we have to double down on JSX or on this, this custom build of markup that Angular is doing these days? Why don't we go towards the templating approach? I think that's a good tension to have, and I'm glad that exists within the community right now.
Yeah. Do you use TypeScript or Flow?
So I don't use either one. Were I to be forced to choose between them, I think TypeScript is a little closer to what is likely to ever land in JavaScript, if JavaScript is going to have something like type annotations, progressive typing, something like that. It seems like TypeScript's a little more in line with what the JavaScript folks are probably going to do at some point. So for that reason, I think you'd probably pick TypeScript. In general, the notion of needing a tool to enforce typing in a sort of static sense at compile time, if you will, or ahead of time typing, I think the general idea behind that is, I'll make two observations. One, I'm glad it exists because there are people that have to, as a result of their job, jump between really traditionally statically typed systems, say a .NET, for example, and the JavaScript code that they're managing for the front end. And if you were in one of those situations, if that was your job to jump across that fence, I can't imagine any reason on the planet why you wouldn't pick up TypeScript. It just seems a no-brainer to pick up something like TypeScript, because you are going to significantly reduce the mental overhead of switching between the two. Now, for somebody like me, on the other hand, who doesn't sit in that world, I focus entirely on JavaScript. I actually feel like it can be a crutch if you choose to take the view that the typing system that JavaScript has is insufficient. I actually think it's quite sufficient, quite powerful, and we just have a couple of generations of developers that were taught, don't go learn it. It's too weird. Lardy Dragons. It's too crazy. It's a bug. It's a mistake. And so people listened. It turns out when somebody really big and important writes a book about that and tells everybody to ignore it, they follow that. And so we have a whole set of people that never wanted to learn that part of the language. And all the complaints that people have about coercion, they seem to track down to a core set of fundamental misunderstandings about what it means to manage types in a dynamic system. I don't think, regardless of what Brendan Eich thinks, he seems to think that he made mistakes. I don't think he made mistakes. I think it's a beautiful system. I think it's very powerful. I think it's useful for creating more readable code by hiding details instead of making them obvious. To me, type details don't need to be obvious in the code most of the time. Some people feel like they need to be more obvious. I think they need to be less obvious, because in many of the cases, the types, and in particular the type that goes from one type to another, that mechanism, many times that is an unnecessary implementation detail. What I'm thinking about is a higher level of business logic, and I just have to get there by casting this thing to this other thing. Those are the sorts of details that I don't want the reader of my code to worry about. And I'm certainly not going to go in a direction of trying to put more information there. If you learn the rules of how coercion works, I feel like JavaScript's type system is more than sufficient. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think that the problems that I have in my code, the bugs that I write, I'm really good at writing bugs, probably better than any of the listeners here. I've got 20 plus years of practice. I'm good at writing bugs. But the kinds of bugs that I write don't have to do with, I couldn't figure out, or I couldn't reason about the difference between a number and a string and what happens in that conversion, or things like that, or I don't know what my promise is holding and that causes a bug. Like, those are not the kinds of bugs I write. So for me, TypeScript and Flow wouldn't do anything. They would create road bumps and extra learning that wouldn't benefit me. That's why I don't use them. But I'm glad they exist, because there's a whole part of our community that I think gets a huge benefit from them.
vanilla JS or frameworks for single-page applications? And again, this isn't an either-or, but what's your take on the contrast?
My take is this. If you go back to think about what frameworks were originally kind of intended for, because I was there, I was around JavaScript for its entire history, so I did see the rise of these. And if you go back to the original ideas around frameworks, they were more about accelerating initial R&D on a project than they were about providing an entire architecture that would scaffold your entire app around and then leave in production. And I think it was over time people realized that the framework, if it was doing a really good job with the prototype, why not just ship that production code? Why take the risk of having to rework stuff? But my example is I always go back to CSS for this. If you think about something like, for example, the Bootstrap project, it used to be called Twitter Bootstrap. It's like a 1.5 megabytes or something of CSS. It's a fantastic starting point if you want to rapidly iterate on the user interface without thinking about the budget buttons and widgets and other things like that. You just simply grab these classes, apply them to HTML elements, and you have a nice, clean, consistent interface rendering with almost no effort. That's a perfect example of what a CSS framework should do. It should make that work almost without having to think about it. You should just be able to drop those things in almost as if it was a drag and drop WYSIWYG kind of a thing. And that's what a framework is particularly well suited for, helping you do that sort of thing quickly when what you need to do is explore your domain, explore your problem space, because you don't really know exactly the problem you need to solve yet. I don't know about other listeners, but for me, most of the time when I start to solve a problem, I don't fully understand that problem yet. And I work it out in the process of the solving. I understand it better and better, and that's why I have to iterate on my solution many times, because the first solution I put down is based on an incomplete understanding of my problem domain. And I can't fully understand the problem domain until I put a solution down and realize it's unsuitable, and then I iterate and I change it. That is what a framework is really good at. It helps you do that because it has all of those options, and with relative painless ease, you can switch between those different options. In CSS world, you can iterate quickly on a UI. But at the same time, if you asked any designer who knows what they're doing, would you ship the Twitter Bootstrap CSS as is with no changes to production? I think most of them will laugh at you and say, absolutely not. I start with the Twitter Bootstrap or Foundation or whatever it is, and then as my project matures, I whittle away the stuff that I don't need, I tweak the stuff that I do need, and I end up with something that is exactly what I want, no more nor less. And that's what I wish we did in JavaScript. I wish we started with frameworks and we used them to rapidly iterate. But then as we began to mature towards production, we were starting to ask, how can I take these parts of Angular out? How can I take this React out? Do I really need Redux now, or do I now understand my state management enough that I could just simply wire up those communication lines without all of this boilerplate on top of it? I think that the frameworks become too much of a crutch in modern production applications. And I used to humorously say, but I don't mean it as an insult, when I hear people say, well, I shipped my React app to production today, I feel like what that really is saying is I shipped my prototype to production. And I didn't take that extra step to say, what's not necessary? I don't think we need most of what those frameworks provide. We need bits and pieces of what those frameworks provide. And another way to think about this, by the way, is the real term for a framework, if you really want to get into it, what is a framework? A framework is not all of those extra, it's not the router, it's not the event bus, it's not the model, it's not any of that stuff. The framework is the specific opinionated glue between those pieces. So the framework helps you decide what are the best orientations of those pieces, and when you say that's not a good one, let me switch to a different orientation, the framework adjusts and flexes so that you can get that orientation. But once you have that, you should be able to swap those pieces out with purpose-built stuff that doesn't have all that extra configurability to it that you're never going to need, And the framework sort of remains in place. The opinionated glue remains in place, while the pieces can be purpose-built. That's what I wish we did, and I wish there was a part of our life cycle that did that. And I'll tell you why I wish this. It's not just because I'm old school. I've already admitted I am. But I'll tell you why. It's because the more we rely upon these big frameworks, we believe in the network effect. We believe that if we choose as a team to be a React shop or an Angular shop or Vue or whatever, we believe that what we're going to be able to do is hire any developer off the street who has React experience and plug them in as a cog, and they'll immediately be up to speed. There's a network effect thought process to these decision making. And it doesn't happen at the technical level. It happens at several levels up, where people don't really know what they're talking about, but they say, well, if we pick this technology that Facebook is based on, and if it has 100 million stars on GitHub and there's books written about it, well, surely that's a good bet for the future of our app. So it's really not even good decision making or informed decision making. But we say, let's pick this thing because we think we'll be able to hire people in. And it is true that you'll be able to hire a person that has the React keyword on their resume. And they may even actually know what they're talking about with React. The problem is if you line up 10 different React developers who have worked in 10 different Reacts, you're likely to get 11 different opinions on what makes a good React application. What is the specific way that those pieces all need to be worked together? And let me just say as a side note, React in itself isn't a framework, but all of the ecosystem around React is absolutely a framework. They like to say, oh, we're not a framework, we're just a rendering layer. But when I say React, I mean the ecosystem that people get with Redux and all of this. So you can ask 10 different developers, and you're going to get 10 different, entirely different opinions more on that particular glue and how it should be organized. So if you hire somebody who says, I know React, the chances that they are just happen to be your particular way of thinking about things are lower. And what that means is the bigger the surface area you have, the more of this flexible, configurable stuff is still in your app. The much larger learning area, surface area that person has when they join your team. They have to come in and learn all of these other things that you're not even using or ever will use, because it's not obvious to them what you're using and what you aren't. So we make it harder on ourselves. We think in theory this is going to be good in that network effect, but we actually make it harder for people to learn code bases, as compared to a code base that is very specifically trimmed down to the task at hand. There's no fluff. You read, you get what you get. You see it and you get it and you use it. That is, I think, the most mature code base, is the one that whittled through all the other various ideas of how to do it and arrived at the best one. And now when I show up to look at your code base, it's clear and evident exactly how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And I don't have to guess or wonder, are we going to use this piece, or how is this piece, fitting in? Yeah. So that's what I feel about frameworks. I'm glad they exist, but I also wish that we were more disciplined in pulling back from them as we move towards production.
So what open source code did you write that you are very happy or very proud of?
I've got several different open source projects. I guess the one that is the oldest and has survived the longest. It's pretty much the first one I ever created. It still exists, still in use, and I'm actually working on updating it to a new version, rewriting it. The very first big open source project I ever did was almost, like 8-9 years ago at this point. I've lost track of time. It is a performance-optimized dynamic script loader. On-demand loading of your JavaScript code, both at page load time and during the lifetime of the page. And it's a very tiny 2K, very highly specific for a task. When I wrote it originally, it was a really terrible environment because the browsers were all inconsistent with how they dealt with resource loading. There were lots and lots of hacks and tricks that you had to play to get it to work consistently. And so the existence proof for Lab.js was all the crap that people were writing custom to get their stuff to load efficiently. I rolled all of those best practices into a library. But my goal eventually was so that that library maybe didn't have to exist at some point. And I petitioned quite a bit, not just in the building of this library, but in the standards and the spec process around it, to try to get the technology platform itself to evolve in a way where eventually a loader like that wouldn't be necessary. I was not successful in those efforts largely. I did make some changes there. There is actually a claim to fame. There is a part in the HTML spec which is there specifically because I said we've got to have it, and they did it, and that's cool. But largely I wasn't successful, which is why loaders are still the thing. We've gone through multiple generations since then of the AMD style loaders and that whole boom with required JS, and now the new school thinking is it's all modules and it's all system JS and other things like that. But lab.js is just kind of hanging around there. It still does a pretty good job if all you care about is loading a script and you don't know anything about it. You don't want to imply a particular design pattern to it. So I guess I'm most proud of the fact that I wrote something 9 years ago that still has some relevance. Maybe it's not hot and popular like a lot of things these days, but it still has some relevance. It's still used in some places. And you don't find a lot of code that can survive that long in this day and age. So I guess I'm proud of the fact that I forged a path back then that was relevant enough to stick around for this long.
Well, something else that's been sticking around for a long time and that's getting a lot of traction is JS, of course. And so with the first edition complete, are you going to extend it? Are you going to update it? Or what's your plan for that series?
So the original plan for that book series, for those who don't know, it's a 6-book series. It's all up on a GitHub repo. You can read. It's 1,100 pages long. You can read the whole thing, all 6 books if you want to. The original plan was the 3 books. I convinced O'Reilly to do that. And as I started writing, I realized that there was a lot more to say about JavaScript. It turns out I needed to learn a lot more about JavaScript than I realized. And so I started writing, and it grew to this 6-book, 1,100-page series over the course of about 2 years. And by the way, that title, I want to explain it because I always want to go on record when I get a chance to explain it. There's debate as to whether this title is intended to be an insult or a challenge to people. And people sometimes pick up the book and they say, "Oh, you think I don't know JavaScript? Let me show you. I do know JavaScript." That's not the intent, and I wanna make that clear. It's obviously a play on the "You Don't Know Jack" game and that sort of thing. That was the original idea. There's obviously JS could mean JavaScript or something else. So there is clearly a play there, but I want to explain the intent. The intent of this is to suggest that the knowing, as if it's a check mark on a to-do list, that the knowing of a language as sophisticated and powerful as JavaScript is not a realistic thing. That nobody, not even Brendan Eich himself, can fully and completely master and know and be an expert of a language like this. And I'll just put it this way, sort of anecdotally. Again, this could come across the wrong way, but I hope people will hear my heart behind this. I have forgotten more JavaScript than most people ever learn. That's not because I'm trying to criticize people that don't learn or if I think I'm so much better than people. It's to say that I went and read and learned so much about the language so that I could write authoritatively about it. And I have promptly forgotten large swaths of what I learned. And people will come up to me and they'll say, on page 34 of this book, and you said this, and I don't understand why that. And I'm like, I look at them like a deer in the headlights. I'm like, I don't even remember writing that. I clearly did. It is my book. It is clear that I absolutely must have written it, and I don't remember writing it. And that anecdote is what I mean when I say the title is intended to get people to embrace the idea that you don't ever know JavaScript. You progress towards learning JavaScript, that it is a path. It's asymptotic, just like in math. You don't ever arrive at it, but it's a journey towards understanding it more and being able to come back to things from a different perspective every time. And each time you come back to a topic with a new perspective, you're going to get something different out of it. There's so many layers to it. So the idea is you don't ever know JavaScript. What you do is learn JavaScript, and you learn it better, and then you learn it again, and then you learn it again, that it's a process. That's what I mean by that title. And it's my own journey. That is essentially an autobiography of my learning journey of JavaScript. That's what the book series is. And I've simply, if you ask, what's the difference between somebody like you, Kyle, who, you kind of know JavaScript pretty well. I feel like I'm decent with the language. What's the difference between you and somebody who's just now learning? And the only difference is that I'm a little further along that curve, a little further along that journey, because I asked some deeper questions than many people did. And I just happened to decide I'm going to write down the answers that I find out. So I asked questions, and I wrote down the answers. And I really want people to know that's the heart behind the series. It's not meant to insult. It's meant to encourage that we got to keep learning and going at it and keep going back over these things. I don't think you need to read the book series entirely, but I also don't think you should read it only once. I think you should keep approaching JavaScript, keep trying to relearn. I have to as well. I literally read my own books to go back and understand stuff in a better way. And I think to myself, when I read it now, I'm like, wow, what I wrote 4 years ago, the perspective that I had on the language 4 years ago is so different than what I have now. I've seen so much more of it. That doesn't mean I'm contradicting myself or I think I was wrong, completely mistaken, but it means that I have such a different perspective now, further along on that arc. And so to your question of, is the series going to be extended? First, let me say, no. There will not be any more books added to the You Don't Know JS series. The 6 books are more than enough. On the other hand, the book series is not complete and probably never will be. There is absolutely the need for a second edition. I have something like 120 open issues on the repo, all tagged with second edition. Probably 100, maybe 150 hours of my time that I need to go spend revising. There are things that have changed about the language, added, that need to get covered. And then there's just a lot of ways that I now think about and teach JavaScript differently that I need to change that voice. So there's a lot to do. Finding time to do it is difficult. But just like I don't want people to finish learning JavaScript and then move on, the book series will never be finished. It'll be continuing, evolving, embracing of that principle that we never fully know the language. We just keep learning it.
And did you ever get the question, how can you make money with open source?
I do get this question a lot. I confront this question a lot, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. Let me try to start at the layer of most pragmatic and answer how I make money with open source. And then I'll try to get a little more philosophical for what other people can do. I chose to approach what I do in the community as give as much away as I can so that I can protect the stuff that I sell proprietary that pays my bills. So for example, I've given the books away for free. That also means I sell them, but the books, the whole content is up there for free. All the code that I give away is free. But I don't give away my training material. I teach JavaScript for a living. I teach corporate training on site at companies, and I don't release that material. From time to time, people are like, where can I get your slides? And I'm like, those are private because that's how I do pay my bills. So I try to have the balance be more like 80-20. Like I give 80% of what I can away so that the 20% that I keep private or proprietary, I can really make a decent living on. And I have found that in that balance, the more I give away, the more I can make off of the stuff that I do sell, the stuff that I do trade my time for money for. So by writing the books, people now perceive me to know more about what I'm doing, and so I can command a higher dollar figure for what I do. By writing the books and giving them away for free, many people more have seen those books than ever would have seen it if it was behind some paywall. And as a result, many more people talk about the books, which leads to more sales. I have sold nearly 100,000 copies across the book series, and I don't think I would have sold a tenth of that had I started with just, well, if you want these books, you got to buy them. but because I gave them away, I sold way more. And I really feel like that is the perspective I take, that I can't give away enough for free. The more that I give away, the more it makes me able to make money on the stuff that I do. Now, that does not mean that this is a silver bullet, because a lot of people struggle in the open source community. They give away a lot of their time and attention to maintaining some big project. The project gets huge. It gets tons of, you wake up one day and there's 1,000 issues on your GitHub because you hit, the Reddit homepage or something. And now all of a sudden you have to do all this stuff for free, and you're exhausted and you burn out and you're begging people for money. So making money off of open source is not a clear line path. And the way I've done it, by giving my content away so that I can then sell my expertise, I can sell my time to interpret and to consult with that, that doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody is cut out for that. I think more people could do it than who do it. And that's why I talk about my path. But it doesn't mean it's the path for everyone. And some people who run open source projects do legitimately struggle with this problem of, I can't make enough money to justify it. I personally have had projects that I've had to abandon because I want to do them, but I don't have enough business justification for that investment of time. I need to work on something else that I can teach about, and that's going to make me more money. That's a real struggle, and it definitely is depressing at times. So I wanted to sort of answer at the pragmatic layer how I make money, and maybe how other people can think about it more. But at a more philosophical level, at a higher layer, I want to talk about the problem of making money with open source, the problem that open source doesn't have enough backing, it doesn't have enough funding. And to do that, I'm going to be a bit roundabout. It's going to sound like I'm on a rabbit trail, but I have a purpose here. In the world today, there is estimated to be as much as 1/3 of the world's population that does not have regular daily access to clean drinking water. And that should be a ridiculous, that should be painful to us to admit something as fundamental as access to clean drinking water is something that 1 billion or more people don't have and can't count on. And that's crazy and ridiculous. And I've also heard it said that there is a dollar figure that could provide clean drinking water wells for every single person on the planet for all of history, forever. It could permanently solve this problem. There's a dollar figure in mind. And before I tell you what that dollar figure is, I just want you to think to yourself the scale and scope of that problem. What is the dollar figure that it would take? And you might be thinking in terms of hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars. And that is the problem, because our brains see a big problem and we think that there must be a big solution to that. And so when I tell you that number is actually just 40 billion, that the estimates are that $40 billion. So $40 billion is that figure. And that is a tangible amount of money that there are multiple people on the planet that literally have that in their bank accounts, doing nothing but collecting interest. And those aren't just people that, they're like a Saudi king somewhere or something. Those are people that are charitable, that are looking for ways to solve problems in the world. And if a few of those people got together and said, you know what, I'm going to take 10%, and you this could be a solved problem. Mm. And it's not a question of not knowing how to do it, and it's not even a question of not having the money. So I've wondered, and I just happen to have personally had some experience with raising money for clean water charities and things, so this is why it's a thing that's on my mind. But I've wondered, if we have this problem that everybody almost universally could agree needs to be solved, and we know that the solution to the problem is tangible and exists, and those people could come together and we could wipe that problem out and then move on to there's lots of problems that need to be solved, but we could wipe that problem out and move on to the next thing. Why doesn't it happen? Why has that problem persisted? And I've wondered to myself, and I don't have a perfect answer to this, but I think one of the reasons is that when a problem seems so huge, and when the solution to that problem is actually so small, the mismatch there causes people to miss out on applying that because they feel like they need to address the bigger issue. And they don't realize that actually the problem is kind of small. So if I take all of that observation, if there's something about our human nature that says we're not going to go solve the clean water drinking problem because that's a problem that should take trillions of dollars to solve, and 40 billion is just a drop in the bucket. I mean, quite literally, the statistics say that if we just took the people in the United States, 300 and whatever 20 million people, and you took one Christmas season, and all the people that buy presents just bought one less present for one Christmas in just America, that would provide the 40 billion to solve this problem. When people see that the problem is so big and yet the solution seems so small, it's almost like we're loath to take those steps because we think, oh, that'll never make a difference. If I gave this $10, it'll never make a difference. And if everybody keeps thinking this problem will never get fixed because I can't do the $1 trillion solution, then guess what? The $40 billion solution never gets arrived at. So that's what I've been wondering about. Is that the reason why this problem doesn't get solved? Is because the solution is actually so small that people miss it. And if that's the case, and I try to relate it back to open source, and this is where I don't have a great answer, but if the problem is so big that open source has to exist because the future of what we do as an industry depends upon our collaboration and our sharing of ideas and our collective intelligence to make things better, I believe it does depend on that. I believe that's critical and vital. It's not just a nice to have. Open source is deeply important. It's in my DNA, and I think it's in a lot of people's DNA. But it's unsustainable because we take so much time and we can't fund it. I think the reason we can't fund it is that by and large, people think the dollar that I have or the $5 that I have or the $10 that I have would never fix the problem. I could never fund Babel with my $5, so I'm not even going to try. And we have a bunch of people thinking the problem is so big and therefore the solution must be so big, and I'm not big enough to do that solution, so the solution never happens. And I think that is a part, maybe not all, but a part of the reason why this doesn't really get solved. And so I've wondered to myself, perhaps the way to fix this problem is not to try to fix it on an individual project basis and not to try to fix it on an individual contributor basis. Not that individuals can't be part of the solution, but instead of trying to get individuals to say, would you give me $5, would you donate $10 to do this? I think maybe what we ought to do is go to the people that actually could, as a rounding error in their budgets, solve this problem. And say to them, you don't even realize that this problem has such a small, simple solution. That's why you haven't done it. And I'm going to show you how small and simple this is. For example, I'm pulling this out, and this is really one of the first times that I'm publicly sharing these ideas, but what if we said the problem is not that we need each project to get some kind of monthly funding to pay them. What if we said the real problem, or the real solution to this problem is, we need a block of money, and I'm going to arbitrarily pick 10 million. I don't know if that's the right figure, but let's just say we need $10 million, and we need to put it into essentially a foundation, a fund, and we need to take the interest off of that money. And if $10 million could generate $1 million a year in interest and never touch the principal, that $1 million could then be divided up among all of the open source projects that the community cares about, and could not just provide $5 here, $10 there, and make little tiny, almost imperceptible dents. We could say to the creators of Babel, here's one full-time developer salary, here's $100,000. You divide that up however you want, but make sure this project survives. Mm-hmm. And we could say that to every project. The reason why something like that doesn't exist is not because the laws don't exist, not because there isn't governance models for it. It's because the people with the money to make that happen think that the problem of funding open source is so much bigger that they'll never be able to do it. and nobody tangibly says, maybe it's just a small solution. Maybe it's just 10 million or 20 million or whatever that number is. And maybe we just have to do it the right way. That, I don't know if that's the right fix, but I think we have to start thinking more like that if we're going to ever hope to make open source something that people can really make money off of.
Well, that's really quite inspirational, and it plays straight into my next question, actually. And Kyle, you know me, I come from a very different industry before coming into this. And, well, for the viewers, I come from oil and gas, so very different.
Yeah.
And full disclosure. Now, the question I wanted to ask you, and as I say, it follows straight from what you've just discussed. Do you think that philosophically the open source idea ought to be applied to other fields of human endeavor outside of science and tech as we are talking about it right here? And my belief clearly is yes, but I'd really like to get your take on that, especially after what you've just discussed.
Let me first say absolutely yes, but let me give that some color. Let me give that some reason behind why I say that. You have to understand how I approach open source to understand why I say yes. I start out, I mean, what I happen to do for a living is write code, and I teach other people how to write code. But any endeavor that you do, I think you could fill in the blanks with this. I start out with a certain set of skills and experiences, a certain level of expertise, if you will, that I work towards producing a good output. But if my thought process is that my skill set is fully sufficient to accomplish that output, then I don't need any other community. All I need is a really good mailing list to market myself. And I think a lot of people approach open source as a targeted mailing list to market what they think are the best ideas and solutions to any given problem. They say, I'm going to start out by writing some code, and I've got this genius idea for how to do it, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to be the next big hot framework, and I'm going to have a conference named after it, and write books, and have a blog, and all this other stuff. We get these ideas, these visions of grandeur, where the idea that we have will start from a seed of our own genius and grow into this much bigger thing. I take a very different approach. And to be quite honest and frank with you, I don't have any conferences named after me. So I didn't take the approach of, let me try to build something that everybody can turn into the hot buzzword, and you know, there'll be Wikipedia pages about me for all of history. That isn't the approach that I took. I took the approach instead, just exactly like I did with the books, that I do with my code, which is whatever version of what I can produce, I assume that that is the worst possible version of that thing. I assume that whatever words I write in a paragraph, or whatever code I put down to solve a problem, I assume it's the worst possible version of what is capable, and therefore the only hope that I have of going beyond myself is to put it out there in the open and to ask, practically beg, other people to come and look at it and help me make it better. To me, that is the purpose of the open source community. Not to market my own great ideas, but in essence to market my own bad ideas, to challenge and encourage and beg other people to help me make those bad ideas better. I start every file as an empty file on a public GitHub repo, and I start putting ideas there, and I try to build some sort of community or some sort of momentum behind that thing so that other people can help me make it better. And if you go and look at my GitHub repo, you will find that I have probably 20 or 30 projects that I have started, all from that same perspective. Look at the Git history. They've all been that way, where I've just incrementally committed what I've figured out. And probably if there are 30 projects on my repo, I don't know what the count is, but if there are 30 projects on the repo, 29 of them I have failed at in terms of creating a sustainable momentum where other people around me think that it's important enough to help me make it better. And I have one success, and it just happens to be my book repo. I have one success story and 29 failures, but I keep doing it. I keep putting those ideas out there, hoping and trying to get other people to help me make those ideas better. And my particular way is JavaScript. But there are so many other parts of, as you say, human endeavor, where, and by the way, there are places where this happens. In the scientific community, there is a rich, vibrant sharing of knowledge for the benefit of all mankind, and that's great, and there should be more of that. But there's lots of other places in the world where we could make the bad ideas better instead of trying to market what we think is a good idea. And if we embraced open source, I think we could do that.
And so what open source project do you think is underappreciated and should get more attention and fame?
What open source project needs more attention? That is a really great question, and I wish I had prepared an answer for that. There are a bunch of projects that have 0 or 1 star. The only star they have is their own creator on GitHub. And you can literally go onto GitHub and search for projects and sort by stars and sort ascending, so that you look at all the millions of projects out there that have no attention whatsoever. It would be difficult to go through that list of millions and find the good ones, but I'm quite certain that there are ones there. And I wish more people were dedicated to amplifying those sorts of voices. Since I don't have a project that I can point out, let me try to substitute a strategy for projects that are in that boat. Very, very intentional about putting every idea of what you want to do into an issue on your public repo. I literally file bugs and issues against my repo that I know I'm most likely going to go back and fix. It's not just because I'm bad at remembering them. I put it there because I'm hoping maybe somebody will stop by and see that and say, I think I could contribute to that. If I didn't put it there, then they would stop by the project and have no idea what was in my head of the things I wanted to do with it, and have no idea then how to contribute. So you can be a lot more specific in your documentation about the places where there are to-dos. That means you should write documentation. A lot of people don't. And if you're looking for the quickest way to turn a drive-by visitor off from your project, it's to not have any documentation or to not have any start towards explaining how somebody would use it. It's not just because you want to market it for people to use. That's how you market it for people to collaborate with you. If they see the ideas put down in a documentation or in an issue, then they have a place to start. So you can do that, and you can even tag your issues with help needed. That's a standard tag that GitHub shipped like a year or two ago. There's a tag, a label that you can put on your issue called help needed. And people can search for issues across all repos that have the tag help needed, and they can find projects that they never would have known about before and say, I want to go find that project. I want to go read that issue. And if you did a good job of describing the problem and describing, potentially putting in ideas about how you do it, I'll make an issue for an idea that I have, and then I will go back to that issue later and I'll put in extra comments in the thread. It's almost like I'm having a conversation with myself, like I'm, I don't know, like I'm talking to the mirror, but I'll put in ideas about how I'd solve it. I'll literally detail, well, I think it would be this way, and I'll put in a link to the line number that I think is the problem or whatever. So I think if you're in that boat where you are one of those open source projects that is not getting enough attention, I would say try not to make it be about you want more stars. You want to be on the front page of Reddit. That should not be your goal. I don't care about stars. I mean, it's nice. It's like a good ego thing for me to say, like, I'm literally just about to hit 65,000 stars on the You.Don't.Know.js repo. That's a good ego boost. But to be quite honest with you, that stars number is almost irrelevant. That, all it tells me is at some point in time, somebody stopped by my repo for the briefest of moments, thought it was cool, but didn't have anywhere near enough time to dig into it. And so they said, well, I'll come back to this later, maybe. That's literally what the star tells me. So, the stat that I actually care about, and while I'm saying this, I'm literally going to pull it up. The stat I actually care about is the number 10,934. There are 10,934 forks of the Udona.js repo. Probably 10,932 of those are just people that forked it because they wanted their own copy on their repo. But there are people that fork it because they are contributors. There's another stat that I care about, 3,644 watchers. There are people that care about this project. There are stats like how many people have been contributors. I can pull up my contributor graph, for example, and say, I know how many people have ever contributed to that. That's the stat I care about. So right now it's loading up my contributing data, and I could try to figure out, okay, how many people have ever contributed in any way, shape, or form? And GitHub literally tells me, wow, the network is huge. We can't even give you a number. But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that over the couple of years have contributed, even if it's just a typo fix. That's the number I care about, and that's the number that anybody listening to this should care about. How good can I be at getting 2 or 3 or 4 deeply committed contributors, not 10,000 stars? If I can get one good contributor, it's worth 100,000 GitHub stars. And looking for ways to do that, to highlight those things. There are resources out there, like there's a Twitter account called Your First PR, which literally they just tweet out, here's a good issue. If you've never done an issue on an open source repo, here's one. So go find those things. And if we all start doing that more, we will find those projects and we'll have better answers to the question you asked me, like what's the project that doesn't get the attention that should. So I'm sad that I don't have a good answer to that right now, but I hope these are ideas for how people can find those answers.
Kyle, how did you earn your first salary ever?
I know I had a bunch of hourly jobs. My first job was a car hop at Sonic. and I literally rode roller skates as a car hop at Sonic at, I think, 16. That's pretty embarrassing. I didn't last long. I didn't love that job, but that was my first job. But my first salary was actually in tech support. I worked for an internet service provider that did dial-up service, like modem service, way back in the day, and I did tech support for them. And so that was my first salary. I think I was maybe 19 or 20. I was in college, and that was the first time I had a salaried job.
And to get a job, would you ever go to a recruiter to hire someone, or find a job yourself?
Oh boy. Any of the listeners that are recruiters or work in the recruiting world would hate me if I told my true thoughts, which are that I think recruiters, by and large, are not helpful to our industry. It's not because they don't mean well. I know a lot of recruiters, and I know a lot of recruiters that do mean well. But I think overall the hiring process is so broken that recruiters don't really have a chance to do the right thing. They just have to chase the thing that they can make money on, which is how quickly can I pair up this keyword with a person that has that on their resume. And that's sad because many good people in the recruiting field will tell you, I would rather spend my time, and I try to spend my time building relationships and understanding people and understanding what companies want. But at the end of the day, they got to pay their bills. And at the end of the day, the quick, cheap, fast way to do things is just find somebody that's got a keyword match, get them an interview, get them a job. Hopefully they stay there long enough that I get my finder's fee, right? And that the problems that exist that make recruiters not good for our industry are not recruiters' fault. They are much bigger problems. But at this point in time, I don't think I would honestly recommend anybody go after a recruiter because those problems are so systemic and so broken that I just don't think recruiters can be the solution.
Well, again, without wanting to be antagonistic, and we've just spoken about recruiters, well, would you move in with a venture capitalist?
Well, it's funny that you mention fundraising. I am actually currently working on building a startup in the education space for developers. Yeah. And the thing that I need to build is more expensive and time consuming than I have time to do myself. And so for the last, I don't know how long, almost a year, I have been on the fundraising circuit trying to raise money from investors. And it has not been an easy path, and I have not succeeded yet. I have raised some money, but I have not raised the money that I need to accomplish what I want to do. And so I speak not from a position of, oh, see, it was so easy, I just did it, just go do it. I speak from a position of, it is so hard, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But since you bring up a venture capitalist, I would say the problem that venture capitalists have is that their model is based on, I'm going to make 99 bad decisions so that the one decision I make is so big that I didn't lose money. I lost money on the 99, but I made so much money on the one that it didn't matter. They're the quintessential loss leader. It's like when Walmart puts a product on the shelf that they're selling for less than the cost to make it, but they only put it there because they want you to walk down that aisle and buy something more expensive. And they're like, we will happily lose money on this stuff because we know you'll buy the big ticket item that's further down this aisle if we can get you onto the aisle. I mean, that is classic, retail strategy. And that's exactly what a venture capitalist is doing. It's a loss leader. They are throwing out money that they're going to lose, and they know they're going to lose it. And you have to wonder about the sociopathy of, I'm going to give you a bunch of money and pretend that I give a damn about this money when I know that I don't care about this money because I know that statistically you are one of those 99 that's going to lose every dollar that I give you. But I'm going to pretend as if I care, and I'm going to rake you over the coals to prove to me that you don't even need the money, and that's when I'm going to give you the money. Once you don't need the money, that's when I'm ready to write the check. Like that mindset of, I don't need this money, but I don't think you need it until you prove to me that you don't need it like that's so, it's bonkers. The communication around those sorts of things is crazy. And by the way, angel investors, they're not any better. I've got a whole set of reasons why I think angel investors suck and aren't helpful for startups. And I'm going to probably piss off a bunch of angels once if I go down that road. So let me just not. You asked about venture capitalists.
Yeah.
I'd move in with a venture capitalist because he's probably going to pay his bills, but I wouldn't be friends with a venture capitalist.
And at the moment, there's so much talk about coding bootcamps in LinkedIn. What's your take on it?
Ooh, yes, I do have a lot of thoughts on that, especially since my startup is directed squarely at trying to address the developer education problem. I've been talking about it a lot lately. So for listeners that might not know, I actually did work for a year at a coding bootcamp. I worked for a year at Makersquare, which is Hack Reactor. It's owned by Hack Reactor. Now they just folded the two brands together, so it's Hack Reactor if you know them. So I worked as the head of curriculum for Makersquare for a full year, and I tried to fix a set of problems that I perceived, and I tried to do it from the inside out. I joined a boot camp tech school because I wanted to fix this problem from the inside out, and I failed, and got laid off from that company after a year and didn't achieve what I wanted. And so now, post that, I'm trying to fix that problem from the other direction, which is my startup is called DevGo, and I'm trying to bring mentoring to the workplace. The real problem that I was trying to solve is that everybody seems to be approaching education as a limited transaction. I pay you some money, you give me some content, and then we're done. And I go on about my way. And if you look back at human history, that is not how humans learn. It is a relatively modern invention that we've thought of the idea of dumping a bunch of knowledge on somebody up front and then expecting them to go be a practitioner of that knowledge and immediately have skill from it. Skill does not immediately follow from knowledge transfer. It never has and it never will. And we have tens of thousands of years of human history to prove that to us. And yet, sometime over the last 150 years, we thought, oh, no, let's completely rethink it. Let's just dump a bunch of information on people, and they'll just figure out the skill part as they go. The reason why we did that We commoditized education. We scaled to much bigger problems. We tried to scale content because scaling people is too hard. There's a lot of reasons behind that, and it's troubling as somebody who cares about education to feel like education has become the ultimate commodity at this point, and that's not a good, healthy place. I'm biased, but education should be first and foremost in our minds. That should be we should embrace that as a lifelong mindset, not just what's the way to get this content in the cheapest possible way and in the most scaled possible way. That it's no that we are going about it by making that education so hollow and shallow that it's virtually pointless. And I say that as somebody who has written books, who has put courses up on video platforms, who has done all of these things. All of my education has been in those mediums, and I am telling you, even as somebody who has been successful in them, it's hollow and shallow and not worth it. And the way that people actually learn, that we know and has been proven, is that it's knowledge plus time. It's knowledge plus relationship. It's the apprentice model. It's internship. It's mentorship. That's how humans have always learned. That's how we've always transferred skill from one person to another, is through that guided process of mentorship, not through scaling content to the highly impersonal, well, I got an on-demand video and I downloaded Kung Fu just like Neo in the Matrix. Like, that's just not how it works. And it shouldn't be surprising that tech schools are trying to feed into this idea that we can dump a bunch of knowledge on somebody without knowing at all what the hiring company really needs. We just know what the overall industry trends are. We can dump a bunch of information on people, and they'll just be able to figure out the skill once they get on the job. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying tech schools are bad. I actually am deeply grateful for tech schools. I think they need to exist. They're solving a huge problem. But the way they're going about it is far too limited. They stop the education at the moment of hire. And education can't stop at the moment of hire, or the knowledge gets lost. And when there is a gap between what you were able to demonstrate on an interview because you crammed for the test, like we do in college, versus what you can do on day 1 and day 10 in the job when your boss really he needs to move on to another problem. He fixed the problem that hiring you was the solution to, and he just needs you to go do. That's what he needs. And if you can't do that, now you're a continuing burden to the team. And I don't criticize people that are in that boat. I want to help people that are in that boat. And there's no help for them right now. Once they graduate, the transaction's done. I've paid for my education. I got my education and I've moved on. And well, now I have to go figure it out on my own by reading books and going to conferences and spending my weekend learning about something because I don't know how to do what I need to do at my job. We need far more emphasis on the education in the workplace, and we need to do it through mentorship. And to make that work, we're going to have to figure out a model that scales mentorship beyond the one-to-one, because one-to-one is never going to work. If there's 1 million people right now that need to learn JavaScript, there's not 1 million of me to go mentor them. I know because I get emails all the time, and I'm saddened because I get emails all the time from people that say, I want to learn this thing. Can you be my mentor? I'll pay you to be my mentor. And I'm saddened every time when I have to tell them, I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to be your mentor because then I can't be somebody else's, and then I can't do this and I can't do that. It's incredibly time intensive and unscalable to do mentorship the way we've always thought. So if we've got to fix this problem, and I'm convinced we do because I'm all in, this is my whole career, is educating developers in a deeply effective way. We've got to fix it. I think the future of our industry depends on it, because if we don't, we're going to be automated away. The inefficiencies that we create, the vast sums of money that are dumped on developers, the $1.4 billion in 2014 that was spent on outsourcing education of developers just in North America, that money is not going to flow forever. Eventually, they're going to say, you developers are too hard to teach. We're going to let the computer do it for you. And we're going to be automated away, just like so many other industries, if we don't figure out how to make education a relevant, constant part, a continuous part of the process of being a developer. And I think that comes through mentorship. And that's what I'm doing with DevGo. So the idea behind DevGo is not to go make books irrelevant or make video platforms irrelevant or even make tech schools irrelevant. The idea behind DevGo is to fill in the gap that all of those have left with the thing that everybody actually needs, which is time and guidance and practice. That's how we take all that knowledge that exists and turn it into skill. So what I like about tech schools is that they are preparing people with knowledge. What I dislike about tech schools is that they stop there. They don't continue. And so I'm trying to fill that gap. I want to make the continuing part happen.
Well, again, very interesting point, especially for me, as I'm, as you know, a product of a boot camp.
Yes.
And it's great to hear this. So another final question to maybe close this interview, and it's on a tangent here. So say there's a solar eruption and a flare wipes out the digital world that we know today. What's your next career?
What is my next career? Well, I think it's safe to say that I have figured out, and it was not an easy path, but I figured out through a bunch of trial and error that I'm meant to teach people. So, if there was no technology anymore, I would find a thing that needed to be done, and I would start figuring out how to do it, and then I would start telling people what I figured out. Because my process of teaching has always been to share my journey with others early, rather than waiting until I was the master of something, because then it's far too late. I share as I go, because as I teach others, I learn it better. People don't realize this, but it is purely selfish. I teach because I get to learn better. It's great that y'all learn, but I learn. And at the end of the day, that's what makes me happy, right? I learned it better. So if we were in a post-apocalyptic world and there was no technology, somebody's going to need to figure out how to get food grown, and I'm going to go learn how to do that. And the way I'm going to make money is not selling food. I'm going to make money and provide for my family by teaching other people how to grow their food or whatever. So I think I would have to go be a teacher, and whatever it was that I was learning would be what I would teach.
Well, Kyle, thank you very much. It's great to finish on that note. And I really want to thank you for the thoughts you've shared with us. It's been really inspirational again, so thank you very, very much for your time.
I thank you very much. It's an honor. I'm always amazed that anybody can get anything out of my ramblings. So I'm honored that anybody would have listened to those and maybe find some sort of inspiration. I would just say, if there's anything that I can do to anybody that's listening to help in your journey of learning this stuff better, let me know, because that's what I'm about. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about my heart and my passion, and I hope we've made a difference for at least one listener.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kyle, and to our listener and watchers, thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to our Let's Code YouTube channel to get more of these super and great interviews. Thank you.